Good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us. And I know you're going to be absolutely delighted with the presentation this morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise for the funding that permitted us to produce these webinars. And thank you for attending. As Brendan mentioned, we are recording this session. Once again, friendly reminder, as you think of your questions, please put them in the chat box. Don't wait till you get to the question period, which today will be at the end of Mr. Beaudoin's presentation, so you may forget it by then. And towards the end, when we're wrapping up and thanking everybody, you will be getting a survey that we will ask you to complete. That's required for our funders, so we know how you benefited from the sessions, and also so we have a number count. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter for today, Mr. Jacques Beaudoin, who is the Director of Public and Legal Affairs for the Réseau Québécois de OSBL de Habitation. Jacques has been involved with community organizing from the end of the 1970s when he started as a student organizer. Before joining the RQOH, he worked with the movement Action Chômage de Montréal, where he represented claimants in front of the Employment Insurance Administrative Tribunals. In 2015, he decided to dedicate his professional activity to the promotion and support of the community housing sector, the right to housing being as an essential condition for the well-being of all citizens. As part of his work with the RQOH, he is notably in charge of supporting nonprofit organizations that provide affordable housing for seniors across the province. Just to let you know, the Seniors Action Quebec is going to be having 8 webinars on the subject of housing, and we're launching it today with Jacques, who's going to give us an overview of the current status and needs, but with a focus dealing with Quebec. So without further ado, Jacques, thank you very much for doing this. Merci beaucoup. And I'm going to turn it completely over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. So I'm joining you today from Lotbinière, which is a small rural community on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River, between, let's say, Trois-Rivières and Quebec City, but on the south shore. Lotbinière is located on an unceded territory from the Abenaki nation. So I want to recognize the Abenaki nation who lived on that territory for many years before the colonization. So, well, today I'll try to present you a general portrait of the situation of housing and the housing crisis in Quebec, in Canada and in Quebec, but particularly in Quebec. But before going into the core of my presentation, I want to say just a few words about what is RQOH, so Réseau Québécois des organismes sans but lucratif d'habitation, which is a pretty long name, but it's in fact we're a province-wide association representing the nonprofit housing sector. Our members are 8 regional federations that deserve and support a whole lot of local nonprofit housing providers. When we speak of social housing in Quebec, most of the time we think of les HLM, habitation à loyer modique, but in fact there are a lot of nonprofit housing providers and a lot of co-ops also that provide affordable housing for different category of population. In fact, in our sector, the nonprofit, we have 1,200 local organizations. Some of them are pretty small, others are pretty big at our level. All in all, those organizations provide 55,000 housing units in 400 municipalities across the province. So, next. Among those 55,000 new housing units, 24,000 are dedicated exclusively to seniors. We'll see later what kind of housing projects are dedicated to seniors in our sector, but it's a specific of our sector. And it's different for co-ops who are more for families. And well, in our sector, we have some housing project for families, housing project for people with special needs, but we have a big concentration of projects that have been developed by many times by seniors or community organizations working with seniors, and those projects are specifically dedicated to seniors. So our association have been found in year 2000. So when we now have 20 years of age. We are part of a network of similar organizations across the country. There are organizations similar than ours in Ontario, BC, New Brunswick, the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association, BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and others. And we are all part of a pan-Canadian association called the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, which is the national body that represents the social and community housing sector at the national level. And in Quebec, RQH is recognized as a official partner by la Société d'habitation du Québec, which is the provincial government body that is in charge of applying programs in the housing sector, and specifically programs for social and community housing. Next. So when we speak of nonprofits, we speak of volunteers involved in all those organizations. So we have 1,200 local organizations. So we evaluate that there are close to 10,000 volunteers involved. It could be in the board of directors of those organizations, but many are involved also in providing support, providing services, and helping to the general management of all those community housing buildings that those organizations are owning. All in all, those organizations also have staff people and we evaluate that 8,000 people are working in those organizations. As we'll see later, some of those organizations are operating seniors residence, private residence, private because they are not governmental, but they are nonprofit in any way. So including those staff people, there is close to 1,000 préposés aux résidents, and well, a few hundred, 200 nurses that are working also in our organizations. We evaluate the global real estate values of our properties at $6 billion. And all in all, our members are generating annual revenues evaluated at $950 million. So our members are community organizations, but they are also in fact recognized as a social partners of the social economy sector, because they are generating from their activity. Obviously, they are collecting rents, and they are also collecting fees for some services they're providing. So they are generating an autonomous economic activity. So they are part of, but without any objective of making profits. So they are part of what we call the social economy sector in Quebec. But they are community organizations in terms of participation and local involvement in their organization. Next. Just before going further, I just want to clarify also a few terms that we are using that could be pretty confusing in the housing sector. We're speaking of social housing, community housing, non-profit housing, or non-market profit housing by comparison to the for-profit sector. But what are we talking about exactly? Next. In the social, community, non-profit, non-market sector, there are three main categories. There is public housing, those HLM, habitation à loyer modique, 65,000 housing units in HLM, and 10,000 other housing units that are owned by public organizations, which are called office d'habitation or office municipal d'habitation. For example, in Montreal, l'Office municipal d'habitation de Montréal. Across the province, there are 150 or 155 office d'habitation, and they are managing those 75,000 all in all housing units that are social, non-profit, non-market, but they are from public owning. Our sector in blue, the non-profit, so as I already said, 1,200 organizations, 55,000 housing units. So they are private organization, but with a collective kind of management and property, and they are non-profit and they are dedicated to provide affordable housing in the long term. Their objective is not to develop their portfolio, housing portfolio, to sell it or do speculation with that portfolio. And you also have the co-op sector. So there are 1,300 co-ops that are owning 31,000 housing units across the province too. So co-ops are smaller than a non-profit, as you can see with the figures. So but all in all, our organizations in the non-profit sector are pretty small in average. So each organization manage between 45 or 50 housing units, but some of them are pretty small, especially in rural area. We have seniors residents, let's say, as an example, in Bas-Saint-Laurent, in the same Modeste with only 10 housing units, and it's one single organization that own that building with 10 housing units. And we have bigger organizations like Interloge in Montreal, Solide in Châteauguay, Un Toit en Ville in Quebec City. Un Toit en Ville in Quebec City, they own a portfolio of 1,100 housing units across 25 buildings in Quebec City. So it's pretty diverse as a sector, the nonprofit sector. So all of them, public, nonprofit, and co-op, they are social in social housing in the sense that they are nonprofit and non-market. When we speak of community housing, this is more specific for nonprofit and co-op. By comparison to the whole housing market, there are few differences between Quebec and the rest of Canada. All in all, between 3 and 4% of the whole housing market is social in terms of being non-market with a collective kind of property. And specifically in Quebec, in the rental housing market, if we look only at the rental housing market, not the home ownership market, it's between 10 and 11% of the rental housing market is non-market, is social or community owned, which is pretty low if we compare with, let's say, most of the countries in Europe. We often hear about the situation in Vienna, where 60 to 70% of the housing market is social. So situation there is pretty different, not the same policy, but all in all, we feel that there's a lack of equilibrium in the housing market in Quebec. If we would have a more developed non-market sector, that would contribute to have, well, a more a market that will be more well balanced than what we have now. The next slide, please. So then, the Canadian housing market now, the challenges we face. Now anyone agree that both in the governmental sector or community sector, and I think in the population in general, in the media, that we're facing a housing crisis, and a very important housing crisis. And that crisis has many touches many aspects and has many impacts, but clearly that an important component of the housing crisis is the affordability crisis. There's an affordability crisis for accessing ownership, clearly. I was looking yesterday at the most recent evaluation from Royal Lepage. Right now, the national median price of a single family detached home in Canada is $833,000, and it has increased by 3.4% since last year. 5 years ago, still according to Royal Lepage, the price for the same single family detached home was $520,000. So in only 5 years, it rise from $520,000 to $833,000. So that speaks a lot about the affordability crisis we're facing in the ownership sector on the housing market. In the rental sector, we're referring to, well, CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, they publish each year in January national rental market report based on data they are collecting each year in October. So they're taking a photo in October each year of the situation of the rental market sector, and they issue their report a few weeks, well, 3 months after, most of the time in January. So in their last report from January 2023, referring to stats that were collected 1 year ago, the vacancy rate across Canada in the rental market sector was 1.9%. Well, there's not necessarily a scientific assessment about what should be the ideal vacancy rate in the rental market sector to have a well-balanced market that would be equilibrate between offer and demand. But generally speaking, all researchers and also both the federal government, the provincial government here in Quebec, they evaluate that an equilibrate market is 3%, should have a vacancy rate of 3%. So across the country, we're at 1.9%. So lack of offer means a rise in the rents, objectively. And that's also what the CMHC report told us last January, where the average rent of housing across Canada rise last year by 5.6%, which last year was higher than the more general inflation rate, which is also rising, as you all know. So what CMHC concluded from those figures is that there's an important growth in the demand, and that growth outpaces the growth in supply. So vacancy rate for purpose-built rental apartments is going down. In fact, that vacancy rate of 1.9% is the lowest since year 2001. And the rents are rising also, and they reach a new high across the country. So the rental demand surge across the country. And this was a reflection of the, according to the CMHC, it's a reflection of the higher net migration rate, return of students on to on-campus learning after the pandemic. But there are also other factors like the higher mortgage rates that prevented people accessing ownership. So if they don't access ownership, they stay in the rental market sector. So it contributes to the growth of the demand with a lack of offer. So that's a situation right now. So CMHC also, they did an estimation of how much housing we'll need by 2030 to restore affordability in the housing market across Canada. And their projection is that Canada needs about 3.5 million additional housing units by 2023 to restore that affordability. And clearly, this actually there's no the pace of constructing right now is not absolutely not going to attain that objective. It's a very high objective that will need a lot of investment and mobilization and coordination of all actors across the country to realize. So there are big gaps, and Quebec is identified as an area in Canada where there's a bigger need of construction than anywhere else, along with Ontario and British Columbia. So it's hard to figure how we will be able to resolve that housing crisis that we are facing. So clearly there's a lack of supply, and clearly there's a need, absolute need to have a rise in the growth of the offer. So we will need to construct and build, but is construction a miracle solution by itself? Some will say that if we augment the offer of housing, then there will be automatically a kind of equilibration of the market, and housing will become more affordable. I'm not sure of that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that yes, we will need that big rise in construction and in the offer of housing, but we also need to make structural changes in the housing market to ensure that housing will become really affordable and will stay affordable in the long term. And now in the market, we're facing a new phenomena, like one that is called the financialization. Sorry, I have some difficulty with that word. Financialization of housing, that refers to a process where big investors are acquiring a purpose-built rental housing with objective of realizing profit may be more interesting than on the trade market, let's say. So that's a phenomena that really developed in big cities like Toronto, Vancouver, now in Calgary, and it's also happening now in Montreal, and it's developing, and this is and the consequences of that is that some renters are evicted from their place because, well, those investors, they're doing some small retrofits with the objective to rise rents and rent those units to people that will have a capacity to pay more. So rising rents, evictions, reduced building services and maintenance are impacts that have been documented of that process of or phenomena of financialization of purpose-built rental housing. I will speak of that later, but the federal government adopted in 2019 a law, the Act on the National Housing Strategy, that established a National Housing Council and a federal housing advocate. And the federal housing advocate recently provided a definition of financialization of housing. Mrs. Hull, the advocate, suggested as a definition that financialization is the growing dominance of financial actors in the housing sector, which is transforming the main function of housing from a place to live into a financial asset and a tool for investor profits. And this is a completely different approach about housing. Housing, according to us, should be seen as a right and a human right more, and in fact, not as a commodity and not as a way to make profits and a way to augment capitalization. But all at the beginning, it should be seen as a human right. So, but these are two different approaches, and the consequences of the slow domination of the financialization approach is creating big problems on the housing market. So the next slide, please. Just to give you a few examples, there's a researcher with whom we are collaborating. He is in McMaster University, Mr. Steve Pomeroy. He did an analysis of the affordable housing market in the rental housing sector from the 10 or so or 12 last years. For the sake of the exercise, he established that the cost of an affordable rent should be $750 a month or less. $750 a month being 30% of an annual revenue of $30,000. So, well, let's say $750 a month as a rent is not necessarily affordable for someone living on welfare. But all in all, for the sake of the exercise, he put the level of affordability at $750 a month. So next, please. And he concluded that the annual rate of loss of affordable housing units since 2016 is more than double the number of new affordable housing units that are being added in the housing market sector. Next. So you can just have a look at the figure. And this is coming from Stat Canada figures. The numbers are coming from the census from 2016 and the one from 2021. So between 2011 and 2016, we lost 322,000 housing units in the rental housing sector, and from 2016 to 2021, we also lost 230,000 of those units. So all in all, we lost 553,000 affordable units in a period of 10 years. And in that same period, new affordable units that have been created, there's not exact, we don't have the exact numbers because, well, we don't have necessarily some of them may be higher than $750 a month, but we know that there have been between 80 and 100,000 affordable or social community housing units that were created in that 10-year period. And as I said, they are not necessarily matching the 700 by month criteria, but it gives you a good look about, well, the reality of the affordability crisis in the rental market, housing market sector right now across Canada. So next, if we look at Quebec, generally speaking, when we look at figures coming from StatCan or from CMHE each year, we see that the situation in Quebec, generally speaking, is a little bit better than it is in other provinces, especially in Ontario and British Columbia and Alberta, where the situation is worse than Quebec. But the trends are the same, with low vacancy rates, with rising rents, and it's no longer just an urban problem that we face in Montreal or, let's say, Quebec City. If we have a look, vacancy rate, as I said earlier, across Canada is 1.9%. In Quebec, according to CMHE, it's 1.7%. In some cities like Gatineau, it's 0.8%. In Saguenay, Sherbrooke, Trois-Rivières, 0.9%. In Drummondville, Granby, Rimouski, 0.4%. Gaspé, 0%. There's no rental housing available right now in Gaspé. Situation, low vacancy rates are especially concentrated in 2 or 3 bedroom units. So for 3 bedroom units for families, vacancy rate is at 0.1% in Saguenay, 0.2% only in Gatineau. So unsurprisingly, the actual Quebec government has been, well, forced finally to recognize that there is a housing crisis in Quebec. But numbers are speaking for themselves, and testimonies from people experiencing problem of finding a place to live also is speaking clearly about the situation we are facing. So the rents also are rising. Still last year in 2022, the rents rise by 8.6% across the province. And it's an average. And it includes also the newly constructed units. But in some area, Gatineau is also an example of that. In Gatineau, the rents rise by 22% last year. Sherbrooke, 13%. In the census metropolitan area of Montreal, 9.3%. And also, the rents are rising more in units where there have been a turnover to a new tenant, 13% across the province. It's an average last year. So that's the situation we are facing. So the impacts of those trends, well, we see the impact with the rise in homelessness. A few weeks ago, le ministère de la Santé et des Services sociaux, the Health and Social Services Department, they published the results of the inquiry they made last year, trying to dénombrer the numbers of people that were living in the streets across the province, and those numbers, which only see what we call visible homelessness and not invisible homelessness, but the numbers doubled from the previous census that was made by le ministère de la Santé et Services sociaux a few years ago. It has an impact on the level of poverty. It has an impact on public health when people are not able to access an affordable, secure housing that fit their financial capacity to pay. So they can They have less money to spend to eat, to educate their child, to be involved in community, in the community life, etc., etc. So it has an impact, a documented impact, also on public health. It has an impact on economic growth, especially in smaller communities where there are needs for having workers. And in Gaspésie, for example, right now, it's all there's a problem of lack of workers, but they simply cannot. And no one can go to Gaspésie right now and decide to going to work there because they won't find any place to stay. So the impacts are really sorry, I will some water. So it's an important impact for Quebec. There are impacts on seniors also, especially since we can go to the next slide. With the rise of the cost of housing, that has a clear impact on seniors because seniors is probably it in fact is the category of the population that have generally speaking, fixed revenues. So when the cost of rising rise, it automatically conduct to impoverishment of people among seniors. When we speak of housing for seniors, cost of housing are rising. There's a tendency also among seniors to go from ownership to rental at some point, not for all seniors, obviously, but at some point in their life, I should say in our life, because I will be officially a senior in 1 year from now. So with for small household, sometimes it's more interesting to have a small apartment, and also or have an apartment in a collective building where there are some security measures or services that are provided. So there's a tendency of going from ownership to rental in a context where there's less and less. The offer of rental housing is declining, and the cost of rental housing also is rising. We have in Quebec that specific model of private seniors residences, what we call in French les résidences privées pour aînés. This is a sector where Quebec is really a distinct society. Right now, it's 18% of seniors in Quebec that live in a private seniors residence. Across Canada, the average is 5 to 6% only, but we have 18%. It's a model that have been developed for years and years, mainly in the 20 to 30 last years. It's a model that answers needs of many people. It's also a model, and I won't go into that in details, especially since you will have another webinar where probably most of you, if not all of you, will attend this afternoon. But it's a sector also where we let that private sector develop an offer of personal and nurse services that people have to pay. So services that we can discuss that, but those services maybe should be provided by the public sector, but but they are provided by private sector in those private seniors residences. So, and people have to pay those services that are not provided at a level that will fit the needs of all seniors across the province. There are other models than private seniors residence. In fact, I have to say that in our nonprofit sector, among our 1,200 nonprofit local providers, close to 200 of them are managing and operating a private seniors residence. But those private seniors residences that totalize approximately 8,000 housing units among this big sector of 135,000 housing units, the RPA sector in Quebec. Those nonprofit private seniors residences are nonprofit, and they are managed differently with the community participation, with a place that is dedicated for the tenants in the board of directors of those nonprofit private seniors residents. So in our sector, we have those private seniors residents, and we also have other community housing models that are not RPA. Some of them are owned by co-ops, some by les offices d'habitation, public housing, some by non-profit. They could be only adapted building and secure building with only apartments dedicated to seniors from 55, 60, 65 years or more. Some are also providing one services like meal service, so they are not under the jurisdiction of the RPA, and some are RPA because they are providing more than one services. In fact, this is the definition. If you want to know what is a private seniors residence in Quebec, private seniors residence is not a CHSLD. Private seniors residence is not a ressource intermédiaire. A private seniors residence is not a building where seniors are living without any other services. Private seniors residence is a collective building where the majority of the tenants are seniors of 65 years of age or over, and where the owner provides at least two additional services, additional than the apartment itself. So it could be a meal service, personal assistance services, nursing care, domestic help services, security services, recreation. So, well, because there has been a lot of confusion, especially during the pandemic, about what is RPA. RPA is housing. Residents are tenants. They have a lease, and they are entitled to all the rights that tenants should have in the housing market sector in general. So the next one, some challenges for housing for seniors. So those models, and the main one is really the RPAs and the RPAs in the private for-profit sector. We don't have anything against that model, and most of the seniors living in RPAs are satisfied of the services they are receiving, and that's a choice that they made to live there. But that model cannot answer the need and the aspiration of all seniors. There's a need to develop, support new models, intergenerational models, for example, models that will allow a more integration between the place where we live and the community around. Many of the RPAs are isolated and located, and in fact, some of them are promoting their offer by explaining that once you decide to go there and sign a lease, you won't need to go outside, and you will have all the services in the building. But some of of us, some of the seniors, they want to also still being involved in the community. So we need more of those models where there will be integration in the community, intergenerational models for those who wish to live in a milieu where there won't be only seniors, but there will be also families or other, well, other type of people living there. We need more affordable housing also for housing. And there's a challenge also with the financing of services needed, what we call the soutien à domicile, services needed at some point for some of us to be able to stay at home and continue to live in our home. The public sector is providing partly those services, but as I said, more and more of those services are provided by the private sector, private actors, the RPAs. Even in our sector, within our RPA, those services has to be paid by the tenants. So with the rising of the needs and also the rising of the operating cost of providing those services, right now we see a big rise in the cost of those services among the rent in the RPAs. So there's also a need to discuss the financing of the services that should contribute to help people stay in their place and live in their place, in their home for as long as they'll be able with that kind of support. And there's also a challenge of maintaining a supply of housing with services in smaller communities. Right now, we don't, in our sector, in our RPAs, we don't have a lot of problems in our big RPAs, like La Résidence Alexignon in Montreal. It's 120 apartments, so it's big enough to still be able to equilibrate our revenues and expenses and keep the rents affordable. But in small communities, let's say in Saint-Modeste, in Bas-Saint-Laurent, that RPA of 10 units, and it's the only RPA, the only place where seniors that live all their life in that community in Saint-Modeste could go if they need to go in a collective place where there's some security and some services that are provided. But it's becoming impossible to keep the viability, the financial viability of those projects. So that's something that we are pleading for with the actual provincial government to have a program that will support the maintain and the development of a supply of housing, affordable housing with services in small community across Quebec. So in that context, all governments are doing things. They are doing some good things and some less interesting things. So there are, the next slide, please. There are different approaches and programs that are developed. Just to have a small look at the federal level, well, before 2015, there were no longer any program for supporting social and community, or let's say affordable housing across Canada. After the election of the Liberals in 2015, the government launched its national housing strategy in 2017 that is still presented as Canada's 10-year, 82 and plus billion plan to give more Canadians a place to call home, which is a very ambitious and global strategy. I have to say that $82 billion is a big number, but it's not exactly $82 billion of direct subsidies or investment. It's comprised mainly of loans that are provided to housing organizations private co-op, non-profit, and the private sector to develop some projects, to build new home, and also to renovate and to do retrofits to affordable housing already existing. The general approach that was adopted in the National Housing Strategy is pretty progressive and interesting. It's an approach based on the recognition of the right to housing and the responsibility of the federal government to adopt policy and implement measures that will contribute to the progressive realization of the right to housing, which is an obligation and a commitment that Canada made in the 60s when they signed in French, we say le Pacte international sur les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels. So that strategy is a comprise of a wide variety of programs and measures whose results, unfortunately, are not up to par. The objectives were big. One of the objectives was cutting chronic homelessness by 50%, removing 530,000 households from core housing need, renovating 300,000 homes, building 100,000 new housing units, create more than 50,000 new community housing owned by co-ops and non-profits. None of those objectives have been met, and they are not. And if we continue at the same pace, they won't be met for 2027. It's a plan on 10 years, so from 2017 to 2027, unfortunately. Next. So the approach is based on the recognition of right to housing. When we speak about the human right to adequate housing, as it is conceived and there have been definition adopted in international law at the UN, for example, it's based on a key principle that housing is a right and not a commodity. Next. And right, when we speak to the right to adequate housing, that's how it's formulated in all those international treaties. That right contains freedoms, the protection against forced evictions, against the arbitrary destruction and demolition of one's home, the right to be free from arbitrary interference with one's own privacy and family, the right to choose one's residence, to determine where to live, and the freedom and the right to the freedom of movement. Next. It also contains entitlements or rights like the security of tenure, housing, land, and property restitution after eviction, equal and non-discriminatory access to adequate housing, and participation in housing-related decision-making at the national and community levels. So to resume the understanding of what human right to housing is, we can say that housing is not adequate if its cost threatens or compromises the occupant's enjoyment of other human rights. So if you have to pay more and it prevents you to have access to eat correctly, to have access to work, have access to education, have access to health. So then if it compromises all those other human rights, housing has to be considered as not adequate. So that's the general understanding that was integrated by the federal government in the National Housing Strategy. Next. So in the strategy, they implemented a lot of measures and programs. Currently, there are still 10 programs, I think, 10 or 11 programs that are managed by CMHE, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as part of the National Housing Strategy. The more important of those programs are, well, there's one called the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that provides subsidies, contributions, and low interest loans to nonprofit and private sector to develop affordable housing or renovate affordable housing projects. There's the rental construction financing that provide loans mainly to for-profit developers for developing projects that will have a small component of so-called affordable housing. And I say so-called, you will see in a few moments what is the definition of affordability in that program. There's another interesting and pretty interesting program called, but limited one, called the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. That has been used in Montreal by a very dynamic nonprofit group called UTIL, Unité de travail pour l'implantation de logements étudiants, that succeeded to develop and build big buildings for housing for university students. There's the Rapid Housing Initiative that was established not at the launch of the National Housing Strategy, but as an answer to the pandemic. So in autumn 2020, that new program was launched, and as of today, there has been three phases of development in that program. And there's recently they launched the Housing Accelerator Fund. We heard a lot about that fund recently in the media because there were discussions as usual, between Quebec and Ottawa because it's a 4 billion fund that was established by the feds. So the part corresponding to the place of Quebec across the country was evaluated at $900 million. And finally, last week, there's been an agreement where the feds will allow a $900,000 to Quebec within that fund. That the details have not been announced, but in fact, the Quebec government will be allowed to use it to support the development and construction of new projects of social and community housing. So $900 million is big number, and it will be matched by the Quebec government. So this is an interesting initiative. So next, there's a problem right now, according to us, with the use of the terminology of affordability housing, especially at the federal level, but it's now the case also in Quebec City with the provincial government. They're less and less speaking of social and community housing, which for us is related to the nonprofit character of housing, and they're more speaking of affordable housing. And there's a lot of confusion among the population about what, and in the media, about what affordable housing is. For some of us, affordable housing refers to the non-profit kind of ownership, but it's really different. And there are, in fact, two totally different and contradictory approaches of what we understand by affordability. Affordability could be based on the ability to pay to someone, by someone, or affordability could be based on a comparison of the price of housing with the average price of housing in the market. And well, affordability based on the ability to pay, there's a theoretical definition next from CMHC. Next. And there's a definition for them, and the same definition for StatCan, and it's a definition also used in Quebec by the provincial government, that affordable housing is considered affordable if it costs less than 30% of a household's before tax income. So, but that's a theoretical definition. Why theoretical? Well, next, because each programs from the National Housing Strategy, and it's the Same thing in Quebec, also with the provincial government. They use different definitions of affordable housing. For example, next, for the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, they use as a criteria not only the capacity to pay. It's not 30% of the revenues of a household that determines affordability, but it's 80% of the median market rent. So in their definition, the criteria for a promoter to have financing from CMHC from that co-investment fund rents at least 30% of the units must be less than 80% of the median market rent and maintained at that level for a minimum of 20 years. The problem with that conception is that 80% of the median market rent, let's say, for example, in Vancouver, in Calgary, Toronto, in Gatineau, for example, in Montreal also, is not affordable for people with the smaller revenues, for the 20% of people who are the lower revenues. And problem also is that the median in those 20 years where that criteria is supposed to be matched, the median market trend will rise and is rising right now more fastly than the inflation rate. So those so-called affordable units, they're becoming less and yet less affordable eventually. The other program, the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, is very, very special. In that program, to have access to interesting condition of financing from CMHC, promoters should dedicate at least 20% of the units they want to build. Those 20% of units must have rents below 30%, not of the median market rent, but of the median total income of all families of the area and maintained for a minimum of 20 years. I will give you only an example of what affordable housing means in that program. In Laval, in last year, in the 2022, promoters obtained financing from that program for building 106 affordable units in a complex of 193 housing units. So those 106 units should be affordable for a minimum. Well, the project is submitted. He made a commitment for 16 years. But it has been accepted in the program. I don't know exactly why. The problem is that 30% of the median family income in Laval, it's $2,200 a month. So for those 106 affordable units in that complex of 200 or so housing units, the rent was established at $2,200 a month. So for me, it's clear this is not affordable housing. Clearly, it's not housing for a household or whose spouses work on minimum wage or where a senior is living with only a pension and guaranteed income supplement. So fortunately, there has been a change in that. Well, there's supposed to be a change in that criteria, in that program, but we're still waiting for the change to appear. It's part of the agreement that was made in March 2022 between the NDP and the Liberals. So the government finally accepted to change the criteria of that program to support the development of more really affordable project, but still that change, we're waiting for it to be implemented. Strangely, with a government in Quebec City, which is very keen to remember us that Quebec is so different. Quebec is not doing the same way than the federal. Quebec is still doing better, as you know. Well, For 25 years, during the time the federal government ceased to support and finance the development of social and community housing from the 90s to the implementation of the national housing in 2017, Quebec, in fact, was different. And Quebec was the only province when the feds ceased to support social housing to implement its own program called the Accès program that for 20 years supported the development of close to 40,000 social and community housing across the province, including housing for seniors, housing for people with special needs, and affordable housing for families. But the current government decided last year to scrap that program, which was no longer working well because it has been underfinanced for years, unfortunately, and the cost of constructions are rising and rising, and the subsidies provided by that program were not matching the cost of building social and community housing. So the government decided to scrap that program and implemented a new one, which is called the Programme d'habitation abordable Québec, that adopted some definitions similar to the federal government of what affordable housing is. So affordable housing is determined by a comparison with the market. So as long as the rents are rising in the market, so the criteria of what affordable housing is rising to. And also that program is also providing financing to for-profit housing provider that could made a commitment of keeping some affordable housing units for only 10 years. And after 10 years, they will be authorized to, they will be liberated from their commitment and they will be authorized to rise the rents. And there would have been public financing involved for projects that would have been affordable only for a small period of time. So that for us, it's not a wise policy that was put in place, but still that's their decision. Right now, fortunately, there's an action plan on housing that Minister Duranceau in Quebec is supposed to launch in the coming weeks. And as I said, with the transfer of funds from the feds to the Quebec government, we're expecting some reinvestment soon in the social and community housing sector. So that may be help to improve the situation in the months and years to come. But it was strange for us that Quebec decided finally to align on the federal in a situation where, well, Quebec was, I can totally say that Quebec was more advanced than the federal for the 2025 last year regarding housing policy. But finally, they decided to go towards a federal approach that is less interesting regarding affordability. Just to say before ending, a few words about the right to housing approach. So next, as part of the national housing strategy, the federal government made a very, very good and very extraordinary and progressive decision in 2019 by adopting what is called the National Housing Strategy Act. There has been a lot of discussion among the sector and with the federal government before the adoption of that act. A lot of work with lawyers specialized in human rights, in international law, a lot of work done by the Rapporteur des Nations Unies of United Nations on housing, who at that time was Mrs. Leilani Farah, a well-known Canadian lawyer who was was having the responsibility for housing for the UN. And it's very progressive. I put on the slide a few articles from the Act. But the Act declared that to be the housing policy of the Government of Canada, to recognize that the right to adequate housing is a fundamental human right, recognize that housing is essential to the inherent dignity and well-being of the person, and to building sustainable and inclusive community, support improve housing outcomes for the people of Canada, and further the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing, which is a key concept. Recognizing, having a right to housing approach and recognizing the right to housing doesn't give a right for any individual to ask the government, well, you recognize the right to housing, you have the obligation of providing me a home. No, that's not a possible consequence of adopting a right to housing approach, but it put a commitment for the government to work continuously with the to attain the objective of progressively realize the right to adequate housing as recognized in international treaties. And also the Act engaged the minister in charge of housing in Ottawa to develop and maintain a national housing strategy. Well, it's only an act. We don't know what the future reserves us. An act could be changed at any time, and we don't know if eventually another government would scrap that engagement that was made by adopting that act in 2019. But still, we think that it was, and it's still a very important realization from the federal government, by the federal government. So within that act, next, they also created two bodies that are really interesting. They created a body called the National Housing Council. It's an advisory body to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, which right now is the Honorable Sean Fraser. The purpose of the council is to further the housing policy of the Government of Canada by promoting participation, inclusion in the development of housing policy, contributing to the success of the NHS, providing advice to the minister responsible for the National Housing Strategy, offering advice on the effectiveness of this strategy, and supporting the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing. The council is made of, 15 people, including the one senior vice president of CMHE, and 11 people that has been nominated after an opening of a candidature was made by the government. The current chair of the National Housing, co-chair of the National Housing Council is Mr. Tim Richter, which is well known as being the founder and president and CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, working directly with the organizations in Montreal like Oldbury Mission, Maison du Père, etc. And they have some powers also to take some initiative. Like this week, they began public hearings about and they're doing a study about the problem of financialization of the housing market in Canada. And they will issue a report that will be communicated to the minister, and then the minister will have the obligation also to present that report in front of the Chambre des Communes. So that is for the National Housing Council. The second body that was established, it's both a body and a person that was a person that was nominated. It's called the Federal Housing Advocate. The Federal Housing Advocate is an independent, non-partisan watchdog empowered to drive meaningful action to address housing need and homelessness in Canada. She, because it's a she. She is a she. She is responsible for making recommendations to improve Canada's housing laws, policies, and programs so that they enable people and families in Canada to have access to adequate, affordable, and safe housing that meets their needs. the federal housing advocate is working with a small team of very dedicated people, and they are all attached to the Canadian Human Rights Commission that provide them total independency with they are not dependent on well on the government or CMHC. So right now, next, Marie-Josée Hull is having that responsibility. She is the federal housing advocate. She was nominated last year in February 2022. She is a very interesting person. She was born in Val-d'Or, Quebec, and raised in Edmonton. She has been the former executive director for Action Logement in Ottawa for years. And recently, she has conducted coast to coast inquiry about homelessness. I don't know how to say that in English. Les campements, the 10 cities across of homelessness people across the country. She came to Montreal last spring to do that inquiry. She and Saint-Jérôme too, and she issued a very bold report on that very critical situation that no one should accept that in a country like Canada. We have thousands of people living, not only living in the streets, but established in 10 cities without any facilities, any support, with all the impacts that it have on those people and on the community around also. So next, just to conclude, as I said, the key words for having a right to housing approach and implementing a right to housing approach is part of the national housing strategy. So further the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing as recognized by the international treaties. So that's officially an approach integrated in the Canadian law, accepted and integrated and supported by the federal government, but still achieving that is not necessarily an easy thing. But clearly any measure, any program implemented, developed by the government should be conceived with that lens of trying to ensure that all those measures, all those policies, be it at the municipal level, provincial level, federal level, should serve the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing. So how to achieve that? Well, we succeeded, in fact, in 2019 to have that law adopted and to have that approach recognized in Canadian law. So, but it was partly the result of all the advocacy work that have been done by organizations like CHRA, Canadian Housing and Renewable Association, our provincial associations too, organizations in Quebec like le Frappru and les Comités Logement, the Tenants Association, that are doing great work to support and promote that approach. And clearly the collective mobilization of the communities, of people, with the goodwill also of the politics, of the governments, of also les fonctionnaires in charge of the different programs at CMHC or la Société d'Habitation du Québec. If we work together with a collaborative approach, in CHRA, we say a Team Canada approach for solving the housing crisis, then it will be able to attain, to produce some good results and progressively attain that objective of realizing right to adequate housing for everyone in Canada. So
Jacques,
that's it for me.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. As everybody can tell, it's a massive file with multiple governments involved. And as I told you earlier, Seniors Action Quebec is having a total of 8 webinars on housing. So please sign up and follow along, because you're going to get a great deal more of information. We're a little behind in our time schedule. Brendan is going to assist if there's any questions that have been put in the chat box. And when we get near the 12 o'clock time, I'm going to shout time. So we probably could take 1, possibly 2, depending how detailed the answers are. Questions. Brendan, do you have any?
Yes, there are questions. I was going to go in chronological order to keep it fair, but if we only have time for 1 or 2, maybe I should be a little bit more selective.
Well, we'll go. We got 10 minutes, so
okay. I think we're going to be okay. So
okay.
starting with the first one that came in earlier, and this is more of a legal question, Jacques. I'm not sure if this is really your domain, but I'll ask it anyway. If you have references.
He's a lawyer.
There you go. So this says an NFP housing complex is charging $40 for hydro separately from the 25% of income rent. It was always included in the rent prior to this year. Is this allowed? And what contributed to this change? Leases prior to this year included hydro, and now it is being charged separately and added to the rent. And then they elaborated a little bit more and said the $40 hydro charge is based on a 1-bedroom with no stove, just a microwave and no air conditioning.
Well, the global answer is yes. This is allowed, but I cannot go into the specific of that case. The reason why some NFP did that, I know one, not in Montreal, that did that. Hydro was included in the rent, but there was some surconsommation of hydro by some renters, and this has been decided. But normally, when it happens, well, in fact, it's a rise of rent. So there's supposed to be a way also to maintain the equilibrium. So I don't have the specifics of that case, but normally there would, if a non-profit housing provider decide to separate hydro from the basic rent, normally it will diminish the basic rent. Otherwise, the tenant would have the right to oppose that rise.
So if I understand, Jacques, by increasing or charging the hydro amount now, the rent should have been equally lowered so that the person was still on that same level?
Yes.
Okay.
But depending also if it's a subsidized rent or not. Well, in non-profit, rents are rising each year too, but they're rising from 1 to 2%. So all in all, if we separate hydro from basic rents, there could be all in all a rise of 1 to 2%. Not more than that.
We'll go to the next one.
Excellent. Next question. Does the housing transfer of funds assist the municipalities to cover the infrastructure, such as new roads, sewage, etc.?
Well, non-profit or co-ops providers, they are entitled to pay all the charges coming from this taxation system from the municipalities. In some programs, not the one from the federal, but in the provincial programs, especially with the new one, the Programme d'Habitation Abordable Québec, if we decide to present a project in that program, there will need to be a contribution from the municipality, and sometimes the contribution comes in by giving a terrain or providing let's say 5-year without taxation for the first 5 years or things like that. But in the end, well, in fact, we have the figure right now. The non-profit housing sector, without the co-op, just our sector, we're paying $70 million a year of municipal taxation. which represent 3 to 4% of the revenues of the municipalities across the province.
Okay. Next question. What is the average percentage our income is considered acceptable? In the past, it was 25%, but I'm sure it's higher. I think this is talking to the 30% that you spoke about earlier.
Yes, from a statistics point of view, we consider affordable housing to be 30% of the revenues before tax of a household. This is the criteria for affordability. In Quebec, we have programs like the HLM, but also in the Accès Logis program and other programs that allowed tenants to pay 25% of their revenues for rent, which is lower, in fact, than the 30%. And to have access to a subsidized rent in Quebec, there are some criteria that varied depending of la grosseur of the household, and depending also on the region. Criteria are not the same in Montreal than, let's say, in Low, in Outaouais, a small rural community, where to have access, the maximum revenue to have access to a subsidized rent in Low, in the Outaouais, is $22,000 a year. In Montreal, it's right now, I think, 33. So it's not the same.
I believe, Katia, you had a question. Do you want to jump in?
Is it okay if I ask it?
Of course.
Okay. Ruth begrudgingly is nodding. Okay. But Jacques, I have one quick question, and I just want to make sure I got the numbers correct. So you said that in the overall market, 3 to 4% is social housing, and in Quebec, in the rental housing market, it's 10 to 11% is social or community-owned housing. Did I write that down correctly? Oh, I did. Score. So my question is Quebec doing better than the rest of Canada? Sorry, my phone's buzzing, so I'm just hiding it.
A little bit. I don't have the exact number for the whole country in the rental market, but it's probably more than close to 9 to 10% of social housing in the rental market sector. Quebec, it's a little bit higher, so between 10 and 11%. So situation is better in Quebec, in fact. This small difference, in fact, it's the difference that happened with the development of new units within the Accès Logis program from year 2000 up until now. Because, well, with some few exceptions in British Columbia, for example, there have been some development also of social housing in that period. But in many provinces, when the federal decided to no longer finance, the province were not able or not willing to match the loss of federal fund, which Quebec did.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up? Because I know. So that being said, then you said later on in the presentation that with the Programme d'habitation abordable Québec, that Quebec was lining up with the federal. So if Quebec is doing better with the social housing, can I ask why do you think they're lining up with the federal?
Market value.
Well, it would be better to ask Mrs. Duranceau and Premier Legault, but clearly it's that there are two things. I think ideologically they are really private market oriented. That's one thing. They are also taking into account, and they're right to do so, the fact that we're facing a crisis right now with some region where the vacancy rate is 0 or 0.2%. We need to develop rapidly, and they think that the private sector has a more capacity to develop rapidly, to provide a bigger offer of housing, and they want it to be partly affordable for a smaller period of time, but at least it could provide results, and maybe results that we will be able to see before the next election, because there would have been, because in fact And when it takes time to develop a social housing, and especially with the Exelogy program that was underfinanced for years. There are some really good, really beautiful projects that were set up by seniors community organizations, and that took 7, 8, 10 years to develop. So we have a group of people who at some time in their life, they identified some need, and they regroup together and they work together to develop a co-op or a nonprofit. And then 8 years, 10 years later, it's very hard to say that, but some of them are no longer there to enjoy the work they did, their involvement and their volunteering they made to develop their project.
For the sake of time, Brendan, are there any other questions from the audience?
There's only one that trickled in here at the last moment that says, is
Okay,
Quebec
we'll
really
take
doing
that
better?
one, and then we will have to call it time.
Yes, it just says, is Quebec really doing better since income levels are lower? It's just a follow-up to the previous thing.
Can you repeat that, Brendan?
Is Quebec really doing better since income levels are lower? I mean, I assume that's that.
Well,
this is fact. I don't know.
in terms of when we look at the figures from Statistic Canada, there's a criteria that they call the core housing need. Core housing need is established by taking into account the cost of housing, and also there are some criteria about well, if you are a family of 4 people, do you live in one single bedroom or apartment, or and they also take into account la salubrité of housing unit. And year after year, the percentage of people having core housing need is lower in Quebec than in other provinces. Independently of their, well, they can have lower revenue, but they pay less, and they are in a better general condition. It's not a big difference, but still we recognize that the situation is a bit better. In fact, I've been doing it a few terms as a board member of Canada Housing and Renewal Association, or Pan-Canadian Association, where I used to speak English more often. But I lost part of it because I'm no longer there. But each time we have a congress, a colloque, or a board meeting with our partners from all provinces and territories across Canada, they look at us in Quebec and like they want their own jurisdiction to do what we did in Quebec in terms of housing. Last example, we have a Quebec, it's a small amount of money, $8 million provided by Ministère de la Santé et Services Sociaux to nonprofit, co-op, and public housing to give what we call community support, having some people that can help tenants to be functional, pay their rent, be involved in the community. They are supporting also associative life in the building, and they don't have those kind of programs in other provinces, and they were so surprised to hear that. Well, here we say 8 million is peanuts. So we need $35 million to do that across the province, but they have zero in Ontario for that. And they're doing community support. I visited seniors residence nonprofit in Ottawa, where there are that kind of support, but they are obliged to go to Centraide and philanthropic to each year to find the money to provide that support. In Quebec, we can rely at least on that small amount of $8 million. So that's just an example, but we have to agree that the situation is better.
Thank you.
We're not only here to criticize.
I'm very sorry to stop it, but I have to call time because a few of us have to be with other presenters for this afternoon at 1, and the rest of them, that the registrants who signed up, you're due back at 1:30. So Jacques, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. C'est très bon. C'est beaucoup de renseignements. Thank you for all the information. There will be a copy of the recording That will be sent to you probably in about a week's time because we're extremely busy at the office. And it will be uploaded on our social platforms, our YouTube channel, and Seniors Action Quebec's website, which is www.seniorsactionquebec.ca. And we thank you all for coming and staying, and hopefully a good number of you are coming back for the afternoon session, where we're going to be talking about private and public senior residences, the cost, the benefits, the cons, and also long-term care. So thank
There's
you.
a survey link.
All back at 1:30.
There's a survey link that was posted in the chat as well. We ask you to take the time to fill that out, please.
Oh, thank you. I meant to say that. And it'll also be sent to them when we send the recording. So if you don't have time to do it now, please do it then and get it back. We need it for our funders. So bonne journée tout le monde. Have a great day and see some of you back later.
Bonne journée. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thanks, Jacques. Bye-bye.
Bye.